Basically, Samhain is the death of the earth, which you would call winter. Everything dies, the earth dies, so it can prepare for the next coming. It's a very significant season, whereas the Christians have taken that away, and I think there's a feeling I've always gotten at Halloween time. It's a feeling that just snapped me right up. It's just something that I really enjoyed the feeling. It's something in the air, and you can smell it almost. You can almost touch it, reach out and touch it, and that's that feeling that I like. My favorite time of the year is the Halloween, the Samhain.
The metamorphosis of an artist is always fascinating to watch. When you're already established and known for something, it's easy to stay with a particular style or genre, and it can be hard to break the mold if you have a new song to sing. And like with Samhain, or Samhain itself, it starts with an end or death. It could be of summer, or it could be of a cult punk band. If you know Glenn Danzig as a musician, not a meme, I'm sure you know of the Misfits and Danzig itself. The former with its buzzsaw, guitars, and almost nursery rhyme melodies, to the latter's blues-inflected hard rock, catchy hooks, and dark aesthetic. But you may be unaware of the grisly and macabre middle ground of Samhain, a band that existed for only a few short years. And even if you are aware, you may not have even heard much of their output, since the only legal way to listen to their music is to sell a kidney or two. Danzig even has a team of people striking everybody uploading Samhain to YouTube. And it's not like he wants to hide Samhain. By all accounts, he's proud of that body of work, as he should be. And he's done a few Samhain reunions as recently as 2014. But with how these albums are treated, you'd think that Glenn keeps the Samhain master tapes locked up in his basement like Sloth from the Goonies. So, let an introduction take place for the unfamiliar virgin ears and those who walk the night. To quote Glenn himself, "Now is release. Now is revenge. Now is the pain. You think you've known pain? You've known nothing." This is the Samhain Retrospective. Now this video is intended to be a sequel of sorts to my Misfits retrospective. You don't need to watch that first, but I do talk a good bit about Glenn Danzig as a songwriter, what makes him tick, and how Samhain came to be. Also, watching that video would make me very happy, please and thank you. But to make a long story short, in 1977, Glenny D formed a punk band called the Misfits, who wrote songs about raping women, killing babies, and old monster movies. And they had the goal to write some of the catchiest and most iconic punk records of that era at the same time. But by 1983, Glenn was getting a bit fed up of being in the Misfits. Brothers Doyle Wolfgang von Frankenstein and Jerry Only, who played guitar and bass respectively, were really stagnating at their instruments, and Glenn wanted to take the band's sound further and into a heavier direction. According to Glenn, he once brought them a song called Mephisto Waltz, and they just couldn't hack it. And it's funny because a version of that song eventually came out in Collection 2, with Eerie Von and Glenn playing bass and guitar, and it's not exactly Yngwie. Glenn was secretly writing songs on the side for what would become his new band, two of which, Death Comes Ripping and Blood Feast, Glenn had the Misfits record on their last album, the hardcore-inspired Earth AD/Wolf's Blood. He did this likely as a last-ditch effort to save the band, and while it may not have worked, the Misfits do great with these songs. You can hardly tell they were written for a different band in mind. Glenn asked Eric Stellman, aka Eerie Von, to join, and Eerie was no stranger to the Misfits. He was friends with Doyle and went to the same school as those guys did, Lodi High. He took a lot of pictures for the band and was their unofficial photographer, if you will. He was in the band Rosemary's Babies, who were pretty big in the New Jersey scene, and I believe he was even asked to join the Misfits as their drummer. Though after a few rehearsals, Eerie just couldn't really play Glenn's new material on drums, and Glenn suggested that he play bass instead, because he really wanted him in the band, so he made the switch, instead recruiting Steve Zing for drumming duties, who previously played with another horror punk band, Morning Noise, and even The Undead with former Misfits guitarist Bobby Steele for a little while. And with Glenn playing guitar, that was the lineup for the first record. a thrilling three-piece, if you will. In 1984, they unleashed their debut album, Initium, Latin for New Beginning.
Samhain, basically, for lack of a better description, is the Misfits with a new name. Where they'd be right now if Jerry had practiced and we grew as we were supposed to. It's Samhain, though. It has its own sound because there's different people in the band and different personalities. Different ideas coming in, too. So, but, basically, song-wise, you know, like The Shift and The How was written in 83. And Archangel I wrote in 1981.
I cannot put into words how confused I was listening to this album after properly getting into the Misfits and Danzig. Both bands, for the most part, were quite accessible. Sure, Glenn may have been singing about Satan or wanting to fucking die, but you almost never noticed because he was unintelligible for the most part, and the music itself wasn't too far removed from other punk or metal bands. But from the first track on Initium, you can tell Glenn was taking you on a totally different ride. It's this weird soundscape with Glenn's spoken word that draws you in, even though there's some pretty nasty plosives.
Now is the pain!
But it's super creepy. It sounds like they come straight from Evil Dead 2. And from the title track of the album, we have the title track of the band. You could call it punk, but it has more in common with a new style getting popular at this time, death rock. It's got the swing to it with what sounds like tribal drums soaked in so much reverb with a bunch of delay to really sell the atmosphere. Glenn was somewhat disappointed with Earth AD because he didn't really get to have much of an atmosphere like he did on prior releases, but he made up for it here, in spades. Also, it's here where we hear a discrepancy because in the song he pronounces Samhain correctly, but in interviews he pronounces it the anglicized way.
Harry Vaughn is the bass player from Samhain.
This might piss off the few pagans who listen to this kind of music, but it doesn't matter much to me. The sense of elevation continues with Black Dream because it's not too dissimilar from something the Misfits might do. The riffs are cutthroat and it's as catchy as the plague with the addition of spooky synths, and with lyrics about a succubus, you get to the essence of Samhain, in my opinion. Al Pike from Reagan Youth was in the band for a hot minute, but he couldn't tour because he had a steady 9-to-5, as well as former members of Minor Threat, Lal Pressler, and Brian Baker, but they left because they weren't comfortable with donning all the black and, in Lyle's words, joining the Misfits Mark II. And even though they weren't to last, Lyle played guitar overdubs in a handful of tracks, like the Misfits re-recording, Horror Biz, obviously being horror business. The new version sounds less lighthearted and more apt for the gory subject matter. For those who don't know, it was likely written about the murder of Nancy Spungen, the girlfriend of Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious. Most people tend to agree that Sid is more than likely the one who killed her in a heroin-induced stupor, but there's some pushback to this. Some say it was someone else like a robber, a drug dealer, or bit-part actor Rocket's Red Glare. And some say that Sid loved her too much to ever do something like that. Me personally, I'm inclined to use the Occam's razor approach. They fought like cat and dog, the knife that killed her was the knife that Sid owned, and Sid had conflicting stories of the night she died. I don't think he meant to kill her, he definitely wasn't of sound mind while he did it, but we'll never know. The only people who know for sure are dead, so take it as you will. As far as the new version stacks up to the original, I think I like it better. I love both, but this version is more tense and unnerving with the drums and the way Glenn hammers the main riff in the verse. I also love how lush it sounds in the chorus with all the guitar overdubs. I think it fits better as a Samhain song than as a Misfits song, but you really can't go wrong with either. My least favorite track is probably All Murder, All Guts, All Fun. It's by no means bad, and I do enjoy it, I just don't think it fits too well. It sounds like an early Misfits song, and sticks out a bit with its goofy lyrics and sing-along chorus compared to songs about the occult and macabre. Like the song Macabre. It's slow and driving with these ghoulish bagging vocals and disturbing church bells. And I love that it stops for a solid 5 seconds in the middle and then starts up again without missing a beat. Though my favorite song here is definitely the unforgettable closer, Archangel. It might be my favorite song Glenn has ever written. It's that good. It was originally written for either The Damned or Damned frontman Dave Vanian in 1981 when there was a possibility of him leaving the band to go solo, or it was just going to be a Misfits song with his famous baritone included. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it didn't happen. I would have loved to hear Vanian take a crack at this song, but Glenn's performance doesn't leave you wanting. The song is about an archangel coming down from heaven to unleash hell on earth. And here I thought it was a ballad originally. But it has a quality, something about the production, the way Glenn sings it, makes me feel a sense of sadness for the forthcoming apocalypse. I guess it's a song to listen to when you're sad and pissed off and want the world to burn. I don't know what that says about me though. I love the bass in this song. One of the few things Al Pike did before leaving the band was record bass for this song, I suppose. Also the post-punk riffs, the huge sound, and those eerie backing vocals, or whatever they are. At points it sounds like growling from a demon. Fitting, I suppose. It's just such a lethal cocktail. One of the all-time best, if you ask me. So that was Initium. Not even half an hour long, but it's still such a great journey and proved that Glenn Danzig was much more than just the Misfits. I'm not sure if I like it better than albums like Static Age or Walk Among Us, but it's undeniably a step in a new exciting direction. It may not be the Misfits, but it's probably better. After this album came out, Pete Marshall, or Damien as he was often called, also formerly of Morning Noise, joined the band, and their next release was going to, according to Glenn Danzig, showcase the extreme side of Samhain.
Now, the name of your latest album is...
It's not an album, it's a 12-inch,
Okay.
5-song 12-inch. It's called Unholy Passion. It's about fucking. It's the first song I wrote specifically about fucking, like about sex.
You guys like to have sex a lot.
Well, I do.
Enough, yeah.
If it's good, not if it's crummy. I Am Misery is about misery as if it was an entity that you could touch and feel, and its whole sole purpose in life is kind of just to fuck you up, just to give you a lot of pain.
Glenn.
I don't do Sinatra because he's scum.
It wouldn't be a Scoop to Mid's retrospective without some stretching of the rules. I don't usually include EPs, I try and keep it to full-length releases, but this band doesn't have the most prolific output, so I may as well include their one sole EP, Unholy Passion. Besides, the next full-length album after this is called Samhain 3. The band themselves consider it a substantial chapter, so why not include it? Unholy Passion is by a large margin the band's least accessible release. I mean, look at this cover. I can't even show it uncensored. Safe to say, this is not a good jumping on point if you want to get into this band. The records that came previous and afterward are much easier on the ears, but this record can be very rewarding if you stick with it. Many songs forego conventional song structures, hooks, and riffs, instead relishing in its dissonance in more ways than one. To quote Yuri Vaughn, who really came into his own on this record in terms of his bass playing, in his book Misery Obscura, which I tried to get a copy of for this video but I refused to spend $30 on an ebook, it's a departure from our first release, more underground, more tribal, a step back further into darkness. I mean, Christ, Misery Tomb is just this low-toned synth while Glenn screams in what sounds like agony. Well, agony or orgasmic bliss. I Am Misery is downright demented. If I had to imagine what hell sounds like, I imagined it wouldn't be too far off from this. Its soundscape is tremendous, and Steve Zing's drums are so tense and build the atmosphere in a frightening way. There's another remake of a Misfits song, the Walk Among Us classic All Hell Breaks Loose, instead titled All Hell. It's less cutthroat than the original, slower and creepier. The riffs are played differently and the drums are doing something else entirely. I especially love how the fills swirl around the left and right channels if you're wearing headphones. I probably prefer the original still, but this version is also great. The title track shows off Glenn once again being a horny son of a bitch, outright singing about his dick, but it works well with the vibe of the song. He's probably singing about fucking whatever is on the album cover. It's about a million times better than whatever he tried to do in Danzig 5, but then again, most things are much better than Danzig 5. The hungry end is fast and ferocious with its droning riffs and more simplistic minimal verses until the band unleashes hell with the chorus, though Moribund is my favorite. It has such a great swinging beat to it, like an old rock and roll song, and it's quite catchy compared to other tracks on this EP. I also love the weird additional percussion and how mesmerizing it sounds. It almost sounds like too nice of a song to be about being in a state of dying. Unfortunately, the version of this EP most readily available has been George Lucas by Glenn, like when he fucked with a lot of Misfits songs in the collection compilations. He recorded additional vocals and completely re-recorded the guitars over Damien's original tracks. I still think it sounds great, I just wish we could more easily listen to the original without having to buy the original vinyl release. Thanks, Glenn. After Unholy Passion, Steve Zing unfortunately left because things weren't moving fast enough for him. He was replaced by London May.
Satan was cast down with his angels to earth, and God gave Satan earth as his dominion. So in other words, if you believe in the Bible, as all good Catholics do, you must also understand and accept the fact that this is Satan's planet. God has given this to Satan as his dominion to do with which he will. And basically Satan is here to put you through the ringer.
November Coming Fire is both the darkest Samhain record and the most accessible. Most of the songs are punchy and give you a hook to latch onto, but there's a slimy layer of ethereal madness over it. I know the auteur label doesn't really apply to music like it does for film, but this album sounds like an auteur-like project for Glenn more than anything else he's ever recorded, including later albums made by the band inspired by his own name. It's got the catchy classic rock-inspired song structures, but with enough doom and gloom to make it a totally different listening experience to anything else Glenn ever did. And it proved influential. According to sources I cannot verify, James Hetfield put this album in his top 10 favorites of all time. But even if it's not true, the Metallica guys still worshipped Samhain. When Guitar Hero Metallica was released, a game I played religiously as a child, they decided to include a song from this very album to it as one of the extra tracks. I use it as the intro for a very good reason, because it's that good. Mother of fucking Mercy. And it's because of this game that Mother of Mercy is now by far Samhain's most popular song, and it's well deserved. The Titanic-sized riff is punishing, and its chorus is so powerful. It simply puts monolithic. We all want our time in hell. We all need our time in hell. Birthright has these tribal sounding drums that blend with the additional percussion and these synths that sound like church bells. And fun fact, the drums in this song and nearly half this album were recorded by Glenn because London May, their new drummer, to quote him directly, was scared shitless. Overall, this album is by far the band's most friendly to newcomers. Unlike Unholy Passion, there's no playing with abstract ideas like Misery Tomb, and the production is more well defined when compared to Initium, leaving nothing lost in translation. Not to mention we have more straightforward songs, or at least straightforward for Samhain, with cuts like Let the Day Begin or the almost title track November's Fire. Hell, there's even a ballad. Granted, maybe not the most traditional ballad with its macabre atmosphere, but if it isn't a ballad, I don't know what else to call it. To Walk the Night is a song about loneliness, longing, and destruction. I love its synths and its haunting sounding backing vocals. It reminds me of something from the Edward Scissorhands soundtrack, or something else Danny Elfman might do. I love that in the second verse it goes slightly off time for a second. It makes it feel much more human, and humans aren't perfect. If it was performed perfectly, then it wouldn't have its foreboding sense of dread. the impression that this album is super commercial. It's still Samhain. We still have lingering elements of the extreme side of the band that we heard on Unholy Passion, especially by the end. Kiss of Steel sounds like something that could have been on Earth AD. Unbridled is a dissonant piece of nervy post-punk. It sounds like a song with everything but the kitchen sink. It's really intense with demon growls, walls of reverb, and slight industrial instrumentation. And the final track, Human Pony Girl, is about the domination of a sexual conquest, with not so subtle references to BDSM. It's the longest track, almost 5 minutes, and it has this very deliberate repetitive groove that never lets up throughout the track length. Hell, even when Samhain once again re-recorded one of Glenn's old Misfits songs, they chose one of the more esoteric cuts of the band's tenure, Halloween 2, a sequel of sorts to the original Halloween. The lyrics are made up of almost entirely non-standard Latin, and it retains the same chorus, but it's slower and moodier. In fact, I used to not like the original Misfits version at all because I heard what Samhain did to the song first, before the original. And it's almost a completely different song. It's even slower, it's groovier, the atmosphere is overpowering, and the biggest improvements, in my opinion, is Damien's fantastic take on the original riff. It's doomy, and the pinch harmonics makes what's kind of simplistic into something really special. I've since grown in appreciation for the original Misfits version, but the Samhain version is miles beyond what Glenn's former band could do. And that's November Coming Fire, by far the best entry point for newcomers and my personal favorite Samhain record. Archangel is still my favorite song, but as an album, November Coming Fire is better in almost every single way for me. You can easily make the argument that it's Glenn's finest hour as an artist. I'm not sure if I agree completely with that sentiment, but I can't really argue either. You could view the band's previous outputs, as good as they were, as steps to something greater, and November Coming Fire is that something greater. Critics at the time called it the maturation of the band. It's still dark and even disturbing at points, but it's a far more focused effort that showcased the superpower that was Samhain. Someone else who thought so was Rick Rubin, who saw Samhain play at the Ritz in New York at the suggestion of Cliff and James from Metallica, and he saw great potential in Glenn Danzig as an artist, so he wanted to sign him to his label, Def Jam Records, but he wasn't impressed with the other members of Samhain, originally planning on putting together a supergroup with Glenn as a centerpiece. But Glenn didn't want to do it without Eerie by his side. Unfortunately, this meant that London and Damien had to leave. The former was replaced by Chuck Biscuits, who previously played in DOA and Black Flag, and the latter was replaced by John Christ, who impressed everybody in rehearsals except for Glenn because he was too metal. But John wouldn't take no for an answer, and he would leave answering machine messages for Glenn for him playing guitar. Glenn thought he was crazy, but Eerie said, well, he obviously wants the job, and before long he was recruited, but they weren't Danzig yet. They were still Samhain at this point. In 1987, Rick Rubin was working on the soundtrack of Less Than Zero, an adaptation of the Bret Easton Ellis novel of the same name. The film is fine, I guess. Robert Downey Jr. and James Spader's performances are highlights, but the rest of the cast leaves a lot to be desired, and I found it a bit aimless and melodramatic. I assume the book is far better. The movie did okay at the box office, but its soundtrack did really well. It's an eclectic mix of genres with hair metal, thrash, hard rock, hip-hop, and pop. It featured big hits from LL Cool J, The Bangles, the first release of Public Enemy's Bring the Noise, and on this album, Glenn not only got to write a song with Roy Orbison, the fantastic ballad Life Fades Away, but even got to sing a song for the soundtrack himself. A guy who had been in the music underground for years was suddenly sharing a soundtrack with The Bangles, Aerosmith, LL Cool J, Poison, and Roy Orbison. But the song he contributed was nothing like Glenn had ever done before or since. Not credited to Samhain or even Danzig, but instead Glenn Danzig and the Power and Fury Orchestra, which was Chuck, John, and a bunch of session musicians because Eerie couldn't quite nail the bass parts. The song is aptly titled You and Me, Less Than Zero, and the song itself couldn't be further from Samhain nor the Misfits or Danzig. It legitimately sounds like something Elvis would record. It's got this old school rock and roll vibe, doo-wop inspired melodies, and a vocal performance that the king himself would approve of. I'm not kidding, this may be Glenn's all-time finest performance. I wish he'd done more stuff like this back in the day. I love the dark stuff too, I mean, look at me. But I also adore songs that deal with human emotions in a raw and honest way without Glenn hiding behind theatrics. I cannot stress this enough, this song is one of Glenn's all-time best. Absolute masterpiece. we all know the story of what happened after. For better or worse, Ruben encouraged Glenn to change the name of the band to Danzig, so never have to worry about members leaving and having to change the name ever again. But Samhain had one last gasp left in them. Before they signed to Def Jam, they were recording some material for their next album, tentatively titled Samhain Grim. And in 1990, after Glenn was balls deep in his namesake band, he released the last recordings of his former, Final Descent.
On your records, Misfits the symbol was a skull. Samhain, the symbol is a skull. What's the fascination with skulls?
I just think they look cool.
People say to me, well, it's a death symbol. Do you believe in death?
I believe in death. Death is part of life. Without death, there is no life.
Right.
Again, without pain.
Are you afraid of death?
No, I'm actually kind of looking forward to it.
To put it very simply and kindly, Final Descent is a non-essential listen. It's not bad, far from it. I don't think Glenn did anything bad until the incident, but this is a slapdash effort. The original pressing, in fact, was half made up of the entirety of Unholy Passion. The version I'm listening to for this video was a version released on the Samhain box set, which I'll buy one day when the bank approves of my loan. The 4 new inclusions for the box set are demos that were recorded before London May was kicked out and before John Christ joined. So Glenn once again is playing guitar. One of the songs is another version of the track Lord of the Left Hand, which is a good track and all, but it's telling that Glenn had so little material to work with that included the same song twice. And it's the far worse version too. The guitars sound worse than the amps I owned as a very young child, and the 3 others are tracks that would end up on future Danzig releases. Possession and Twisted Cane, which are neat but won't blow your mind if you heard the Danzig versions, and an Elvis cover, Trouble, which is damn cool with its keyboards and moody vibe. I probably like it better than the version on Thrall Demon Sweat Live. It's sloppy, but it strangely works.
My middle name is Misery. When I'm evil, then don't you mess around with me.
One thing that really sucks about Final Descent, other than the obvious demo quality to be found, is that we hear some really cheap-ass drum machines for nearly half of the album. When Glenn was putting this release together in 1990, he was still on the outs with London May, so he just got rid of his original drum tracks and didn't even bother at least replacing them with drum tracks he or Erie recorded like he did with the many tracks on Collection 2. Erie's a damn good drummer, and Glenn showed he was capable on the tracks he recorded for November Coming Fire, but I guess he was too cheap and or too lazy to actually record new drum tracks, unfortunately. It's such a shame. Night Chill is a cool instrumental with a neat atmosphere, but it's almost ruined when you hear R2-D2 come in on the drums. Descent is great, but the main drum part sounds really awkward and clicky, and Lords of the Left Hand is missing this groove you can tell it originally had when an actual human was on the skins. It sounds anemic, and it really brings down what could have been an amazing song. But on the bright side, there's one song on this album that features both John Christ and Chuck Biscuits. And you might think, okay, this is just a Danzig song then. And it was. Erie Vaughn said that the song Death in Its Arms was recorded during the Danzig 2 sessions. And let me tell you, after hearing that shitty ass drum machine, hearing Chuck Biscuits do his thing is like a fresh drink of water after walking through the desert for days. I don't know if it was originally a Samhain song that they decided to record for Final Descent, or if it was a Danzig song that they decided didn't fit on Lucifuge. But I'm glad they put it here. It does have a Samhain spirit to it, and it wouldn't have fit on Danzig 2. It's not the most mind-blowing song of all time, but it has a killer groove, and you can't argue with the riffs of John Christ. Final Descent isn't the greatest swan song fans could have hoped for. It's incredibly uneven, and despite a few choice cuts, I can't really recommend it. This is only an album you should listen to if you've already heard the previous records and just want another taste, but keep your expectations at a reasonable level. This is more of a compilation odds and ends release than a proper album. In fact, you can easily make the argument that I shouldn't have even included Final Descent in this video. But that was Samhain. Yes, Danzig was basically Samhain since it was the same members as the band's final lineup, but they underwent such an extreme transformation, so for that reason, along with a name change, I will refrain from talking about them until a later date. There's been a handful of Samhain reunions, but it's only Glenn, Steve Zing, and London May switching out between bass and drums with whatever guitar player is playing with Danzig, with whatever guitar player is playing with Danzig at the time. Damien declined to return at least for the first reunion in 1999 because he was touring with Iggy Pop, and Eerie still had bad blood with Glenn after the Danzig debacle and told Steve Zing to go fuck himself when he asked him if he wanted to come back. I say this, but I'd still go in a heartbeat if I had the opportunity to see them play live. But it's not quite Samhain, let's be real here. But a really cool thing came about because of the partial reunion, with a supergroup, Son of Sam. Todd Youth, who played guitar in the 1999 tour, got inspired to write a bunch of Samhain-esque songs, and he got Steve and London to play bass and drums, respectively. And after seeing the band AFI open up for Samhain on the previous tour, he was able to get Davey Havok to write lyrics and sing on it. Even Glenn guested on a couple tracks playing guitar and keyboards. I wish Todd could have gotten Glenn to actually sing a song or two. No disrespect to Davey, I mean, he did great, but it still would have been really cool to see Glenn lay down some vocals. But Davey was an interesting choice. Early AFI was heavily inspired by Glenn's music. Just listen to the All Hallows EP, especially their cover of the Misfits' Halloween, one of the best Misfits covers if you ask me. It's a bit weird because Davey's a tenor compared to Glenn's baritone, but it does work. Don't go expecting it to sound exactly like Samhain, because it doesn't. Son of Sam have their own tricks up their sleeve. It's a shame that the band didn't end up doing much more other than recording this one album, Songs from the Earth. It came out in 2001, right when AFI was getting a lot of attention, and Davey didn't really have the time to devote to such a niche and slightly esoteric side project when his main band was about to be signed to a major label. Son of Sam made one more album in 2007, but without Havok, and I won't lie, without him, Son of Sam loses a lot of its appeal. But that would be it for the band. They never recorded after that, and Todd Youth would pass away in 2018. Rest in peace. But Songs on the Earth is still a really fun time. And that's about it to the Samhain story. Unfortunately, I can't really recommend you guys go out and listen to the records because these albums are still out of print and have been for decades. You can't stream them on Spotify, and Glenn's team will take down all uploads of his work, especially Samhain that they can find on YouTube. It makes no sense that Son of Sam, the offshoot of Samhain, is on Spotify and is readily available, but Samhain itself isn't. How backwards is that? Glenn, if you're watching this, and I know you're not, please release these records. They deserve it. They're far more deserving of the special treatment you're showing garbage like Danzig sings Elvis and these god-awful films you're trying to make. And if not a vinyl/CD re-release, I refuse to believe it will take much effort for you to just puke them out onto streaming services. Or even if you can't be bothered to even do that, at least ease up on the folks trying to archive Samhain stuff on YouTube. They're doing what you can't be bothered to do and making this music more available for people to hear. Claim the revenue if you must, but stop taking them down. Hell, I had to jump through so many hoops to just get decent Samhain live footage. I imported this DVD from the States for almost $30. $30 for a DVD. I can justify that price for 4K discs and even some Blu-rays, but a DVD? Get real, dude. I may as well have paid $100 for a Betamax tape. And besides the price, the DVD itself is cheap as hell. Total ripoff. But with that put aside, Samhain is still one of my all-time favorite bands. I think it showed Glenn at the height of his creativity, and they made such unique music that can't be equaled. Samhain signifies death, but the festivities don't last forever, so maybe it's for the best that it died itself because it gave way to something new. And before anybody asks, I can't guarantee that next Halloween there will be a Danzig retrospective. Danzig has way more albums and I only really like 4 of them, so majority of the video will likely just be me bitching, but I promise to make a Danzig video at some point because I do love those first 4 records, and who knows, maybe my opinions will change on the later releases. I can't promise you'll get it soon, but you'll get it eventually. Take it easy, party people.
If there's one thing you had to say to everybody, anywhere, what would it be?
What?
Anything you'd like to say to anybody, anywhere?
I have no idea.
Subscribe to
Scooped Mids.